I've said before that I believe we as humans do what we want to do. And what I mean by that is when we make a decision, right, if we're given the choice between a bowl of vegetables or a bowl of candy, when we pick the bowl of candy, we do that knowing that's what we want. In that moment, it's not a mistake. Our calculation says, eat that candy. And that's what we do. Now, later on, maybe we run a different calculation, context is different, circumstances different, and we think, I should have eaten the vegetables. But in that moment, everything worked exactly the way we wanted it to. We ate that candy because that's what we wanted to do. And if you kind of expand on that and kind of blow that up, and ultimately that came from Socrates, I think, and probably somebody before him, right? That concept that's how we function. It makes me think about how we form beliefs, right? And particularly in today's world, literally today, with all the animosity and division and, the political spectrum in the US and just how much anger is out there. And you think about it, and what I often come back to is that certainty is at the root of a lot of it, right? So many people are so certain that their views are right or the way they're looking at it is right. And that leads to a lot of the anger because it's almost like, how could that other person think that? Or how could they not see it the way I see it? And clearly I'm right, so I'm justified to be this angry and I'm justified to take these actions, whatever they might be. And that's at the root of a lot of it. So those two things, when you kind of put them together, when you think about it, certainty. In effect, I think from like a mathematical logic perspective, as I often talk about, if you have a viewpoint, I think my hypothesis is I think that you are almost by definition certain, right? You almost by definition believe with certainty you are right. And why do I say that, right? Like, let's kind of walk through it a little bit. So you're looking at a topic. You're trying to figure out if there was fraud in the election. Let's just use that as an example without getting into all the details of it. We'll just use it as kind of an example to illustrate. And let's say you've come to the conclusion that there was no fraud, or there was fraud, doesn't matter. But let's say in this case there was no fraud. So you've looked at whatever information you've looked at, right? You've watched some news articles, you've read some articles, maybe you've done some research yourself, maybe you talked to somebody who has some knowledge of the situation. It could be anything, right? Maybe none of that. Who knows? Maybe you just assessed what you think. You use some reference points that you have in your own experience. But one way or another, much like when it comes back to that, hey, am I going to eat the bowl of vegetables or am I going to eat the bowl of candy? You do what you want to do. You make a decision because you think it is the right decision, which almost sounds stupid to say and obvious, but it's important, I think, that we grasp that, right? When you decide that there was no fraud in this election, implicit in that is the belief that you are right. Because if you thought you were wrong, you wouldn't come to that decision. You wouldn't have that viewpoint. So if you form a view, you form that view because you believe you're right. Unless you were mentally ill or some other, issue, you wouldn't form a view unless you thought you were right. Now, somebody might say, well, it's a view, but you're open to change, which is kind of what I'm for. And I think that's true, but it might just be words, it might just be semantics, but I think in that case, you don't really have a view. Maybe you have a theory, right? Maybe you have a hypothesis. And again, we're kind of playing semantics here, but you haven't actually formed a conclusion. You don't actually have a belief. You don't believe this thing. You think it might be true. And to the semantics point, like that seems like, well, what the hell are we talking about? Why are we even wasting time on this? Because I think it matters. I think those little words add up and they matter in our minds. When we keep telling ourselves we're certain or we believe this or we know this, right? Back to Richard Feynman, what it really means to know something. We are allowing ourselves to make a leap that we should not be making, right? We're going from whatever it is, 80% certainty, 90% certainty, 99% certainty, and jumping to 100% certainty. And we're doing it without really acknowledging it. And that's important, right? So bring it back for a second. Basic level. We form a belief. We form a view on a topic. We assess it. We look at it. We say, yeah, there was no fraud in this election. What's the relevancy of that? Well, for us individuals, the ones forming that view, it's important that we acknowledge where actually am I in the spectrum? Am I deciding that I am certain that I am right, that there was no fraud in this election? Or am I saying I think there might not have been? It looks like odds are there wasn't, right? Those little things will be reminders to you and more importantly to your subconscious when somebody then comes in and says, well, I think there was fraud. You'll say, well, interesting. I'm pretty sure there wasn't, but I'm pretty sure, I'm not certain, so maybe you'll give me some information. But maybe more importantly, the reason I bring up this topic is for the outside person, right? When you're interacting with somebody who's formed a view or a belief or a conclusion on something, it's important that you understand that, right? It doesn't mean you go with them. It doesn't mean you don't challenge them. But when you're talking to somebody and they say, I think there was fraud in the election, it's important that you understand the mechanics behind that. In their minds, they've done the work, they've done the analysis, and they've come out to this decision. In their minds, it would be insane to see it the other way, right? If they could see it the other way, if that was something that was even at all possible to them, and they thought maybe it was different, they wouldn't have formed that belief. They would see it the other way. So you have to look at it through that lens. In their minds, of course they think they're right. Of course they do. So your job isn't to tell them they're wrong. Your job isn't to shame them for the belief they formed. Your job is to see the work, figure out like, oh, okay, I get it. You believe you're right. Totally good. I'm not going to change that. Help me get there. Help me get to where you are. Show me the work. And if you do that the right way, if you work through it with them the right way, perhaps you'll allow them to uncover, they'll revisit, right? Now they're going back through the process, and now there's a chance they might revisit, recalculate, reassess, and come to some different conclusion. They may not, and they may be right, so that's fine. But it's important that you make that distinction. I think we're often so quick to say, no, you're wrong. In that person's mind, they can't even fathom that. What do you mean I'm wrong? That's impossible. I'm not mentally ill. I'm not insane. If I form this view, it's because I'm right. I have to be. And that slight tweak in perspective and the words we use, I think that stuff matters.